We continue our weekly series on cases of the wrongfully convicted. Tonight we bring you a story about how resilience led to a Christmas miracle for one man who was sentenced to life. Devonia Inman was in his early 20s when he was wrongfully convicted of armed robbery and murder and sentenced to die in prison. From day one, Devonia insisted he was innocent of the 1998 murder of Donna Brown, a Taco Bell night manager in Adel, Georgia. Not only was the evidence against Devonia not there, but someone else had confessed to the crime. But in 2014, the state Supreme Court declined to hear Devonia's appeal. He was imprisoned for 23 years until December 20th, 2021, when he walked out of prison just in time to celebrate his first Christmas as a free man with his family. Joining me now is Devonia Inman's attorney, Tiffany Bracewell. Thank you so much for coming on the show, counselor.
Thank you, Yodit.
Just bring our viewers up to speed, will you? Can you tell us about the case briefly and how Devonia was a suspect and then later convicted?
Sure. So the history in this case is a long one, and I'll try to be brief. But in our view, Devonia really was a suspect of convenience. At the time, there was no physical evidence that law enforcement had to go on. No prints, no DNA tying Devonia or really anyone else to the scene. So the investigation largely devolved into finger pointing and hearsay, which had been collected in multiple rounds of witness statements from really a very young population of Black men and women in Adel, many of whom later reported being afraid during the investigation and being pressured, particularly threatened that their children would be taken away by DFACS if they did not cooperate. Devonia's name, unfortunately, was on everyone's tongue at the time because he had just moved to Adel within 2 or 3 months. He had a very minor, unrelated interaction with law enforcement weeks prior to the murder. And so his name was on law enforcement's tongue as well. Really unfortunate circumstances and timing when it came to his arrival in Adel.
Now, here's where I'm confused. There was a guy named Hercules Brown. I'm guessing that there's no relation to the actual victim in the case, who confessed to committing this crime. But during Devonia's trial, the judge refused to allow the jury to hear testimony from Hercules about his confession. Why?
So that is correct. Hercules represented through counsel at the time that he would plead the fifth and would not testify at Devonia's trial. There were other witnesses to whom Hercules had confessed. Those witnesses were proffered, and the trial judge would not allow them to testify. He found that they were not reliable enough, which is usually a decision in the province of the jury on credibility of the witnesses. But under Georgia's hearsay rules at the time, they were not permitted to testify about the confessions that they had received from Hercules Brown.
Now, the prosecutors who said that there was not one, and this is a quote, not one scintilla of evidence linking Hercules Brown to this murder, the guy that confessed, but all the while, they actually withheld evidence that linked him to this murder?
So that's right. I think in addition to saying not one scintilla being a stretch from the truth, given that they were in possession of information about confessions, we learned through effectively having to reinvestigate certain aspects of this case that the Adel Police Department and thus the prosecution team was in possession of information that Hercules Brown had another homemade ski mask during the commission of a crime with a firearm prior to Devonia going to trial. And that's significant because 10 years later, the ski mask that was recovered from Donna Brown, the victim's car, had Hercules Brown's DNA on it. So 2 masks, 2 homemade masks, for that matter, in the possession of Hercules Brown, which surely would have made a difference to a jury had they heard this evidence during the case.
So let me get this straight. So the mask that was used, this homemade mask that was used to kill Donna Brown, was that in the possession of prosecutors during Devonia's trial?
Yes, so there was a mask recovered from the victim's car. DNA testing was not available at the time of the trial that would have pointed to Hercules Brown. The mask was admitted as an exhibit at trial.
Tiffany, why not? Because when it comes to DNA, that is always the it thing, the it factor, the evidence that exonerates so many people after spending decades in prison. Why was this mask not tested for DNA? It wasn't this trial wasn't that, it wasn't in the 80s. DNA was available at the time. So why did it take so long to actually get it tested?
You know, I do not know. I was not involved at the trial, but the district attorney's office and Devonia's counsel subsequently in 2011, when it was tested, you know, it was by consent. And part of that standard was that the testing was not available. This was contact testing, or maybe some of the more sophisticated forms of testing that are now available. The mask was processed for hair in 1998 or 1999 when the GBI was involved in processing the evidence, but it was not tested for DNA then.
Let's talk about the only evidence that prosecutors actually did have. It came from witness testimony, 4 critical state's witnesses against Devonia, 3 of which recanted their testimony, saying that they were pressured or coerced by police. The only witness that didn't recant was paid $5,000 for their testimony. Who paid that $5,000?
So we understand that the reward was posted by Taco Bell, and that she came forward over a month after the murder occurred. And I don't know when she claimed that reward, but the timing was suspicious.
Now, tell me, I mean, listen, the evidence against Devonia was clearly not there. You had witnesses recant. You had someone who actually confessed to the crime. There was DNA evidence linking him to the crime. Why was the AG so hell-bent on fighting any sort of opportunity Devonia could have gotten for a new trial, to have his case revisited? Why was he so adamant, or she, I'm not sure who that was at the time, until a judge basically told the AG to cut it out?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. You know, we certainly felt from the moment we filed this petition that we had meritorious claims. Devonia has persisted in his innocence for years, which is not an easy thing to do in this state. We met with them, but they felt like they needed to see the process play out before the habeas court. And we're very thankful that it played out as it did, but it was a longer road than we felt it needed to be.
Tiffany, we were supposed to have Devonia and the Inman family on tonight, but because of technical difficulties, we couldn't. So hopefully we can get him on with his family in the future. But can you just tell us, if you know, how his first Christmas was with his family after spending over two decades in prison?
I think joyous is probably the best word I have, and also a little overwhelming. I've received several wonderful photos of Devonia with relatives that he hadn't touched and probably never had touched, grandchildren, cousins,
wow,
his mother. It looked like a joyous household. And I think, as his mother said, I still kind of wake up every day and peep into the room and am overwhelmed that he's there, that he's with us.
Well, I'm definitely wishing the Inman family the best of luck in the new year. Tiffany Bracewell, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
And for coming on. Appreciate you.